perfectly capture the default moral code at the front end of the 21st century. Nevertheless, I would hope, perhaps naively, that after a few moments of reflection, we would see that these new commandments are filled with some stunning contradictions. They say you don't need God to be a good person, or to know how to live, number 5, and yet the 7th non-commandment is a summary of the Golden Rule, which came from Jesus. Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. They talk about the scientific method, number 3, without an awareness that Francis Bacon's method of inductive observation gained popularity in North America in large measure because of Presbyterian and Reformed theologians who saw Bacon's approach as a good way to make observations about God's created world. More to the point, these non-commandments are logically indefensible. They're presumably called non-commandments, so as not to sound so commandment-ish, yet they're all commands. They all carry the force of a moral ought. We live in a paradoxical age where many will say right and wrong is what you decide for yourself. And yet these same people will rebuke others for violating any number of assumed commands. As a culture, we may be quite free and liberal when it comes to sex, but we can be absolutely fundamentalist when it comes to the moral claims of the sexual revolution. The old swear words may not scandalize us any longer, but now there are other words, offensive slurs and insults, that will quickly put someone out of polite company. We are still a society with a moral code. And then there's the second to last of these non-commandments. How does this ought square with the other 9 in the list? How can we be told to leave the planet a better place, and think of others and exercise control over our bodies, if there really is no one right way to live? Which is it? Do as we say, or do as you please? It can't be both. I know the contest was a publicity stunt for a book Bayer and Figdor wrote on being atheistic humanists. But the authors seem to genuinely believe it's a fine idea to develop your moral code by taking the temperature of those around you. Elsewhere in the CNN article, we read, Bayer said humans are hardwired for compassion, and the scientific method and wisdom of crowds, or the tribes that gather online each day, will weed out bad ideas. In other words, this is an open-ended and hopefully progressive process, he said. I don't know what internet they're looking at, but I have not found online to be a place that's entirely trustworthy for weeding out bad ideas. Remember, Bayer and Figdor had to appoint a committee of 13 judges to pick out the best non-commandments. They realized instinctively that we might not come up with a great moral code just by asking people what they think. In fact, going to the internet to find your way in the world is often one of the worst ideas. Not too long ago, I came across a story about the British government's attempt to name a $287 million polar research vessel. In an effort to generate publicity for the new vessel, the government decided to name the Royal Research Ship by way of an internet vote. The agency in charge of the contest suggested to British citizens that they look at names such as Ernest Shackleton, the famous explorer, Endeavour, or Falcon. But the people's overwhelming, runaway choice for this state-of-the-art research vessel, the clear winner of the internet vote, was, are you ready for it? Boaty McBoatface. You've got to love the British sense of humor, but that wasn't exactly the name officials were hoping for. In the end, the agency decided not to go with the clear winner of the contest, and instead picked the 4th place entry, naming the boat after Sir David Attenborough. The wisdom of crowds isn't always wise. And that goes for commandments as well as for boats. The Bible says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. The way to find moral instruction is not by listening to your gut, but by listening to God. If we want to know right from wrong, if we want to know how to live the good life, if we want to know how to live in a way that blesses our friends and neighbors, we'd be wise to do things God's way, which means paying careful attention to the 10 Commandments. Before we look at the commandments themselves, we need to lay some important groundwork.